I want to talk about Mayor Carol Holiday today. It's as simple as that. Right off the bat, I'd like to stress that while I usually upload analysis, as in things I've pored over with quite some scrutiny, this is speculation, which is going to be a bit more out there. Also, this is actually part 1 of a 2-part series, and the next video is going to be very, very interesting. It is the juiciest part and is going to be more supported. Bear with me here. I think Carol is super interesting, and we collectively aren't paying enough attention to her. We've all got an idea of who she is, but I'd like to talk about her motives and what she's doing. Carol is clearly on a mission, but what mission? She has some evident involvement in whatever conspiracy we've walked into. Kris seems to have some sort of promise with her, and she goes out of her way to express her control over them pretty openly. But she also has been trying to get between Kris and Susie's investigation in regards to the shelter code situation. We've already begun to identify several of Deltarune's major themes, 2 of them being nostalgia and escapism. The whole atmosphere of the game is coated in this thick nostalgic smog, and we see it almost everywhere. Escapism, however, is arguably even bigger. That's the whole idea of Dark Worlds. Each one represents its own version of escaping into something. If you're at all up to date with Deltarune, you can see how easily these concepts play into Carol's character. Today, my points are that ultimately, I think she has a dark world that she's protecting, the shelter, and I think the night is both her prize and the means of which she strives to do this. But that's not where I'm ending this here. There's something else, something huge that I am surprised I don't see more people speculating on, but I gotta catch you up to where I am before I say that piece. I really think that in Carol's mind, this is all for Des. To her, she's still alive in her own personal dark world. According to my own theories, this would be due to the fact that the night is patterned off her, but there are a multitude of theories that would fit here. You don't have to subscribe to mine. None of this is really new territory, though, but there's something else. We've seen the night target 3 people so far. Toriel, Undyne, and Asgore, who are all presumably shelter code holders. But why target them? Because they're the only people who could stop the fantasy. We know now that Carol does go to the shelter, which is a dark world, and she'd be one of the few people able to get in, but I think she needs one of the few to be reduced to the only. I believe that the prophecy ends with all of the fountains being sealed. That's why Ralsei insists on being forgotten and why Susie reacts the way she does, but also why the night is the Roaring Night, specifically. Carol wants the fountains to stay open at any cost, and what is the Roaring if not just an overabundance of dark fountains? Literally joining the war on the Roaring on the side of the Roaring. The only problem is that I think Kris, as her pawn, is starting to see through it. At some point they were on board, but I believe they're starting to think it's going too far. They were fine investigating with Susie in Chapter 4, and by this point I think they'd understand how far Susie would be willing to go for these things. If they were fully bought into Carol's scheme, they would have had Carol shut it down, but they let Susie get away with getting so close. They have Carol interrupt Susie after getting the guitar, but how easy would it have been to intervene personally? Plus, they stop us from seeing the code, but the door was left wide open. They can't get caught giving the code to Susie, but they need her to find it. Not to mention how the knight didn't succeed at taking Toriel, because Kris doesn't want it to do that. That was the real reason Kris slashed the tires to have Undyne called, why they left the door open. Undyne was bait. They're evidently afraid of the knight, and if the rest of their teammates are down, they'll hit with full strength. It ends up failing at grabbing Toriel, but again, it's not that it's been so soundly beaten, rather Undyne shows up and its risk-reward calculation determined that grabbing Undyne would go way smoother. The knight, or whoever is working with it, tries to get Toriel the next day at church, but luckily again, she's safe at home due to the weather. In Chapter 5, it goes for Asgore, another person Kris might have good reason to not want taken by the knight. This is where they actually find another shelter code, and they try to destroy it, and they don't succeed, but again, I don't think they wanted to destroy it. They know, or at least imagine they're being watched, so they make a big show of trying to rip it, but go slow enough that Susie comes back and finds them with it. They knew the code was there, and Weirdrot proves they're the one narrating, with how all of the flavor text is gone in Chapter 5, so why let us know the code was there in the first place? Why not sift through the dirt with their eyes shut and rip it before we could figure it out or something if destroying it was the goal? And again, why not interrupt Susie and Noelle in Chapter 4? They're fighting back in the only ways they can. They slash the tires to get Undyne called in order to give the knight bait. They reveal the code to Susie, but put up just enough of a show so that whoever is watching will think they tried to hide it. If Carol is the one watching, then obviously Kris can't get caught interfering, but I want to suggest that it could also be us. Kris is unsure of our motivations, and Weirdrot is explicitly about the lengths we'd go in order to have our answers, so who's saying we wouldn't snitch to Carol? This is actually the same reason they flashed the knife all creepy like in Chapter 1. It's a ruse. There's a common joke about how it would be so much easier if Kris would just work with us, but I don't think they can risk it. We're playing the game, but Kris is playing us. This is the part of the video I've been so antsy to get to. It must be mighty convenient that Kris is the one Carol has power over, the person we use as our vessel, and the hero from the prophecy about stopping the roaring. There is one explanation for it all, and it's that Kris wasn't meant to be doing any of this. They're an agent Carol herself inserted into the story, and this is where I started going mad. You can ignore every other word I say here today, but if you consider any of this, I want it to be these next words. I think Carol is the one who interrupted the Goner Maker at the start of the game. Which is crazy to say, but this is not just a hypothetical wouldn't it be crazy idea to me. The idea of who cut off the vessel creation is an old mystery, and one that I feel has been tabled for a really long time when maybe we should still be talking about it. This is also the thing that's going to get me to talk about Gaster here for real. The only answers I've seen stick are that it was Kara from Undertale somehow, or literally a second Gaster. Now, I'll say I don't know if Gaster is a singular entity these days, but it also feels a little silly to imagine that Gaster was simply cut off by a second, more evil Gaster. Possible, but seems a little far-fetched to me personally. The biggest hurdle is proving that this is something Carol would be able to do, but can we? If you go into the Holiday family's basement, you hear an interesting sound. Do you know what that is? It is, much like the shelter, slowed down garbage noise, aka the same sound that plays in entry 17, aka muse_smile, aka Gaster noise. This is apparently the place she keeps everything important, and it's gotta be some kind of Gaster device that she has, and it or the shelter are emitting some sort of frequency that Dark World phones seem to intercept. I'm not sure how she would have gotten her hands on it, perhaps it was taken from the shelter in the first place, but that's honestly something I don't think we have close to enough information to make any sort of case around. This leads into something I've believed for a while now, which is that we're all misinterpreting what banishing the angels heaven would mean. Most assumed that Deltarune would see Noelle get pushed to her breaking point and open her own dark fountain, but I think that's wrong. I don't think it's the heaven brought by the angel, I think it's the heaven for the angel. We know now that Susie is trying to bring Noelle in on the shelter-solving team, and the shelter dark world would be Noelle, the angel's heaven. A perfect world where her mother's love is abundant, her sister is still well, and where things can be healed through magic, but again, it isn't real. The dark fountains cannot remain open. This heaven must be banished. Finally, I get to talk about the potential emotional payoffs of all of this, and I personally find that it could wrap up nicely. Deltarune is a game about many things. The power of fiction, the dangers of escapism, fear, and the future. What a perfect antagonist could that make Carol, if she's a woman stuck living in a frozen, idealized version of the past? What a remarkable foil to Susie, who's all about forward momentum. But of course, none of Carol's fantasy is real. Maybe Des really is gone. For good, I mean. Even us, the players, are obsessed with imagining she's okay somewhere, but we can prove no more than Carol. She would have to look in the eyes of an animal wearing her daughter's skin and make the choice to seal her away, to let that wound try and heal. To me, it really feels like Carol hasn't started healing because she doesn't know she's wounded. She flips her lid when she finds Susie playing the guitar, but the very next day, Rudy has talked her into being okay with Noelle and Susie. I don't think she was actually bothered by Susie playing it, but rather she needed to verify that she didn't spot the code. Once Carol confirmed this, probably through Kris, she wasn't too upset. If she honestly believes her daughter is in there somewhere, then she just has to get her out and bring her home, and she needs Kris to do it. Closing thoughts. Obviously, this has a lot of gray area and weak spots, but that's the fun of it. I want this video to serve as an open-ended conversation, and I'd love to exchange ideas with all of you in the comments. I'm always open to being wrong, but especially here. I just think Carol is more important than we give her credit for. She's a character that's so frequently reduced to being Noelle's evil mom, so I want to take this as a more humanizing approach. It's pretty much a whimsified version of parent refuses to grieve and instead acts like their missing child is fine, and I think it would be so earnestly heartbreaking. It compounds with Noelle, too, because she describes Des as having left in the weird route. She says that much without compunction, since Des left. Deltarune is about the past because Deltarune is about the future. It's a game that lives in darkness, but it's darkest before the dawn. That's right, go outside. It's beautiful.